that satirizes race relations in modern America. Well, hello and welcome. President Obama has described the start of the military operation to take back the Iraqi city of Mosul from the so-called Islamic State as a major step forward. The city has been under the extremists since the summer of 2014, and dislodging them is expected to take many weeks. Well, from the south, Iraqi security forces backed by coalition airstrikes have captured a string of villages. From the east, Kurdish Peshmerga forces have also taken several villages. Our correspondent Orla Guerin is with them and sent this report.
In the distance, Mosul, a city in waiting for deliverance from a brutal regime. It's the last bastion of IS in Iraq, but for how much longer? On the horizon today, black smoke from burning oil, the extremists trying to thwart attacks from the air. As the net closes on so-called Islamic State, the risks are increasing for those trapped down below in Mosul. There's the danger of coalition airstrikes. IS could try to use the local population as human shields, and if and when Iraqi forces make it inside the city, they could be caught in the crossfire. Here's what IS wants you to see from inside Mosul. Its latest propaganda video paints a picture of normality. The message is, all's well. Anyone daring to say otherwise could be beheaded. Thank God everything is fine, says this man. It's peaceful here. The TV channels are lying, 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 lying. Victory over IS can look like this. A year ago, they were driven from this area by airstrikes and troops from Iraq's autonomous Kurdish region, the Peshmerga. But this area is cleared.
Yes, we cleared.
They took us to see what IS may have in store when the battle comes to Mosul. Here, a homemade chemical weapon, chlorine gas attached to an improvised mortar. Crude, but potentially lethal. The fuses have already been removed. How many of these did you find?
24.
Just in this village?
Just in this village.
As the Peshmerga advance deeper into IS territory, new insights below ground. This hidden layer was uncovered in villages captured yesterday. They built a bedroom to rest, he says. There were blankets. The extremists had the basics for survival, hidden from view. The authorities here hope they will run out of hiding places in the coming weeks and months. Orla Guerin, BBC News, east of Mosul.
Well, that's Orla Guerin there on the front line. Well, our correspondent Richard Galpin is in Erbil in the north of Iraq and joins me now. Richard, is there any signs yet of anyone leaving the city?
Well, there are some reports that's coming in from various agencies saying that some families, the quote is about 100 families who apparently have started leaving their homes in the kind of southeastern area of Mosul. We can't confirm that ourselves, but certainly there do seem to be some initial indications of people at least trying to get out of areas where they think an attack might come in the coming days or weeks. But obviously the aid agencies have been preparing for quite a long time now for a huge outflux of people. They're expecting hundreds of thousands of people to try and get out of the city once the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga fighters and the others involved in this offensive against IS start really closing in on the city. And at the moment, obviously, we're not sure how long that will take. It could be some time or it could be quite quick. It's very difficult to tell at this moment. But there are extensive preparations by the UN, by other aid agencies to be able to look after and shelter hundreds of thousands of people.
And Richard, how are the Allied forces going to manage this exodus and make sure just civilians are leaving?
Well, that's a very good question. Our understanding is that there will be one route out, and that, of course, being for civilians to get out when the fighting gets really close. We understand that Iraqi forces, we're not sure exactly which ones, will be on that road and will be trying their best to check the people who are coming out, because obviously they want to stop the Islamic State fighters from being able to flee, get out, and therefore be able to fight another battle another day. But obviously that could be a very hard task if the kind of numbers that people are talking about are actually realized, and there are hundreds of thousands of people on the move. Aid agencies are talking about it potentially being the biggest humanitarian crisis of the year.
Now, you're in Iraq. If Mosul indeed is liberated by these forces, what does it mean for the influence of IS where you are in Iraq?
Well, it's enormous. It would be an absolute hammer blow to Islamic State. It is, of course, as we all know, the place where the leader of ISIS declared the caliphate for both here in Iraq and in Syria. And also, Mosul will be the last big urban centre which IS controls inside Iraq. It would really only leave them with Raqqa in Syria as a major stronghold. So it would be an enormous impact. IS would still potentially have some control in the north and east of Iraq, but essentially their control over big swathes of territory would really be over.
Richard Galpin, thank you very much, joining us live from Erbil in the north of Iraq. Now let's take a look at some of the day's other news. And Russia says it's halted its airstrikes on rebel-held neighbourhoods in Aleppo 48 hours ahead of a planned pause. The Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu said Russian and Syrian forces were stopping their bombing to allow preparations for civilians and fighters to leave Aleppo during a scheduled 8-hour period on Thursday. Mr. Shoigu called the rebels to take advantage and withdraw. Austria's backtracked on plans to demolish the house where Adolf Hitler was born after a panel of experts said it hadn't been their recommendation. The government has said a new building will take its place, but in a new statement, the government backed the experts' view that converting it into an administrative building or something similar would strip it of its symbolic power. The British bank NatWest has denied reports it closed the accounts of Russian international television channel RT. A bank spokesperson said in a letter that the account closures were sent to one of the station's suppliers, not RT itself. The spokesperson said the accounts had been neither frozen nor threatened to be closed. Ministers in the UK will choose next week which of London's airports should be expanded to meet the growing demand for air travel. Both Heathrow and Gatwick want to build a new and longer runway, but a final decision by Parliament won't be made until next year at the earliest after a public consultation. It's been delayed repeatedly because of environmental concerns. The head of the International Olympic Committee says he's confident that the cost of the 2020 Games in Tokyo can be brought down. Thomas Bach's comments follow crisis talks with the city's new governor. She wants to reduce the costs, which are now projected to exceed $30 billion. That's over £24 million and more than 4 times the estimate. Just 3 weeks ahead of the US presidential election, and Melania Trump has insisted that her husband, Republican candidate Donald Trump, is a gentleman and that women who've made allegations against him are lying. She also said that lewd comments he made about women that were caught on videotape did not represent the man she knows. Nick Bryant reports.
Women are under attack. What do we do? Stand up!
A protest this morning outside the Trump headquarters in Philadelphia. There's ongoing outrage here over the billionaire's obscene remarks that were caught on tape and the allegations that he repeatedly sexually assaulted women.
We're sick of him, we're sick of his comments. We don't want a sexual assaulter as our president.
I think he's a sexual predator. I think he has zero respect for women. He's also a racist.
In the midst of this storm, a serene Melania Trump, a wife turned character witness, prepared to forgive her husband.
Those words, they were offensive to me, and they were inappropriate. And he apologized to me, and I accept his apology, and we are moving on.
It's in the American suburbs that this election will be decided, and here female voters often have the decisive say.
Bill Clinton, what he did in the White House.
Andrea Serio is still voting Trump and thinks Bill Clinton is far worse.
I think Bill Clinton is the epitome of disrespect towards women. And for Hillary to tolerate that, she's just as bad.
But a new poll in the Philadelphia suburbs found that Donald Trump trails Hillary Clinton by a staggering 43% amongst female voters, the kind of numbers that spell disaster for his campaign. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Philadelphia.
Well, President Obama has been talking about the election campaign. He said it was unprecedented that Mr. Trump was apparently trying to, as he put it, discredit the elections before votes had even taken place. And he used Florida, which has a Republican governor, as an example.
The notion that somehow if Mr. Trump loses Florida, it's because of those people that you have to watch out for, that is both irresponsible and, by the way, doesn't really show the kind of leadership and toughness that you'd want out of a president. If you start whining before the game's even over, if whenever things are going badly for you and you lose, you start blaming somebody else, then you don't have what it takes to be in this job.
Well, that was President Obama speaking. So will Donald Trump's campaign and his comments about women affect the fortunes of other Republican candidates running for office in November? Well, a number of senior Republicans have been distancing themselves from him. Our North America correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports now from New Hampshire.
The seasons have changed, and so much else, since Donald Trump scored his first victory in the Republican primary here in New Hampshire. Now we're just weeks away from finding out whether he'll win the White House. When Americans go to the polls in November, they won't just be electing a president, but a number of other offices, as you can see from this ballot paper here. Everything from governor to senator, all the way down to sheriff and county treasurer. But this election, many Republican candidates have withdrawn their support for Donald Trump. So the question is, how will this make a difference?
Both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are far from perfect, and I'm not perfect either.
Kelly Ayotte is one of those Republican names on the ballot. She's seeking re-election to the US Senate and recently withdrew her support for Donald Trump.
I cannot vote for Donald Trump based on what he has said and done and the actions he talked about in those tapes.
I'm disappointed it took her so long to drop the endorsement.
At this diner in Chester, New Hampshire, many Republican-leaning voters believe Kelly Ayotte's decision to dump Trump was a long time coming.
She must think that he's not going to do that well, so she wants to distance herself from him.
I will vote for Kelly Ayotte for election, and for the most part, most of the Republican candidates that are rerunning for election that are already in office. And it would take a snowball in hell before I'd ever vote for Donald Trump.
When they're not all together, it hurts the party.
One of New Hampshire's most influential newspapers has backed the Republican presidential candidate for more than a century. But this time they've broken with tradition and are endorsing Libertarian Gary Johnson.
I think Ayotte is doing the right thing. It may cost her the election, but I think it hurts rather than helps down-ticket Republicans that Trump is on the top of the ticket. And it may be one of those sea changes where the whole Congress switches back to the other party.
Mr. Trump still has a large support base in this state. For many of them, congressional races don't even matter.
It's a great crowd.
I don't think that the Republicans have done a particularly good job in their control of the House and Senate either. So as much as we'd like to see those seats retained, in the end, if we're not getting anything done, then what difference does it make?
Both Donald Trump and Kelly Ayotte need to win here in November. But the Republican split in this small state could have a big impact on the party's fortunes. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News in New Hampshire.
Well, this week, the people of Aberfan in South Wales are having to relive the terrible events of half a century ago, when a mountain of coal waste collapsed onto the village school, claiming the lives of 116 children and 28 adults. The scale of the disaster made headlines around the world and made people give generously and support the shattered community. But as Hugh Edwards reports, the families of Aberfan have had to fight for decades for justice, a fight that started that Friday morning in October 1966.
We are now returning to the newsroom.
Disaster struck suddenly this morning at the small Welsh coal mining village of Aberfan, near Merthyr Tydfil.
At 9:15, on the last morning of lessons before half-term, Pantglas Junior School was buried underneath a mountain of coal waste. The scale of the loss, 116 children and 28 adults, is still difficult to comprehend half a century later.
What happened at Aberfan was one of the greatest disasters in the modern history of Wales, indeed the modern history of the United Kingdom. And it's important to get one thing clear. This was no freak of nature. It was a man-made disaster. It was entirely foreseeable. And it happened because of a combination of negligence, arrogance, and incompetence.
One of those who survived the disaster, her life still overshadowed by the events of 50 years ago, is Gaynor Madgwick. She was 8 at the time and lost her brother Carl and sister Marilyn on that day. She's since written a book about her experiences. We met in the Memorial Garden on the site of the old school in Aberfan.
The ceiling of the school had come in and it landed on half the children, and I had a radiator that had come off the wall and it literally landed on my lap. I just remember looking at another friend of ours who had literally tried to climb up through the roof, which was on top of the children. And she said, I'm going to get help, I'm going to get help. You know, she was only 8, bless her. I was whisked away in the ambulance to St Tidvil's Hospital, and I remained there, isolated I feel, for over 3 months. And it was then in the evening time that I was told that my brother, my sister had died, and all my friends had died as well.
Within weeks of the disaster, an official tribunal was set up under the Welsh judge Edmund Davis, and it started in robust fashion.
Well, I should hate to think that anybody would connect me with any whitewashing exercise.
But getting straight answers from the National Coal Board, the public body which owned the mines, proved a very different matter. The chairman of the National Coal Board was Lord Robens, and he denied any responsibility for the disaster and kept on insisting that it could not have been foreseen.
We have our normal procedures for ensuring that pits are safe, but I'm bound to say that we have no procedure that tells us that there is a spring deep down under a mountain.
This is the site of the old Merthyr Vale colliery. This is where the coal waste was put in trams and then sent across the valley and piled high on the mountains opposite. And those tips used to dominate the landscape. And there was plenty of evidence, based on previous incidents, that piling this waste on wet mountainsides was an exceptionally risky and dangerous thing to do. And yet, those warnings were ignored.
By the time the report was published, the National Coal Board had been forced to admit that the disaster was foreseeable. It was blamed unequivocally for what had happened, but no one was disciplined or sacked.
I only wish that Lord Robens was here today. They should have been sent to jail, lost their jobs.
But the battle was far from over. There were still coal tips above Aberfan, and people quite naturally wanted them gone. But no one was ready to pay. Not the government, not the Coal Board. The families lobbied the Welsh office in Cardiff, demanding help. What they got instead from the Welsh Secretary George Thomas was a bill. He wanted the local community to use their charity fund to make a contribution.
Of course, they will pay what they can afford, but the scheme will depend on what they pay.
It took 30 years for the people of Aberfan to regain the money they'd lost. It was finally repaid by the Welsh Government, and today the gardens and memorials of the village have been restored, giving the families the sense of justice that they surely deserve.
Collectively, we've been able to 50 years get through it as a family. I've always said Aberfan is a family. We've shared our thoughts and feelings. So many good things have come out of Aberfan, and you have to think like that. You know, they are courageous, courageous people.
That was Gaynor Madgwick, a survivor of the Aberfan disaster, speaking to Hugh Edwards in this week, the 50th anniversary. Just want to bring you some breaking news this hour. Belgian media are reporting that 15 people are being held hostage by an armed man in a supermarket in Brussels. The police are on the scene at the moment with a helicopter overhead. There is no information at this stage to suggest it is terror-related. So some breaking news to bring you this hour. 15 people being held hostage by an armed man in a supermarket in Brussels. No information yet that this is terror-related. Well, he's been called the funniest writer in America, but Paul Beatty's novel covers the very serious topic of race relations in the US. His latest, The Sellout, is a satire about the man who tries to reintroduce slavery and segregation back into the country, and it's been shortlisted for this year's Man Booker Prize. Well, earlier I caught up with him and he began reading a passage from his new book.
Black people don't even talk about race. Nothing's attributable to color anymore. It's all mitigating circumstances. The only people discussing race with any insight and courage are loud, middle-aged white men who romanticize the Kennedys and Motown. Well-read, open-minded white kids like the tie-dye familiar sitting next to me in the Free Tibet and Boba Fett t-shirt, a free freelance journalist in Detroit, and the American Hikiko Mori who sit in their basements pounding away at their keyboards, composing measured and well-thought-out responses to the endless torrent of racist online commentary.
Paul, that's a part of your book, but is that true? Do you think, especially in this election year, there needs to be a wider discussion about race in the US?
Yeah, sure, why not? You know, is it true? Yeah, I think it's. I think what that passage is getting at is in the way that people talk about it, and I think that there's changing a little bit in the past few months. But I think there are things that people want to say about race that they're afraid to say, you know, because being castigized. There's a phrase in the States that they say, playing the race card all the time, which is if you complain that it's out of bounds and, you know, there's something wrong with what you're saying, it's not valid. And so I think people are afraid to step in that. And if you do say something, I think people feel like it puts you into a box.
What kind of things do you think people are afraid to say?
I mean, I think, you know, it's weird because, you know, this book, you know, finished this book like almost 2 years ago. So, you know, things have changed. But I think one of the things was, you know, talking about job discrimination, housing, all these kind of things. And I think people censoring themselves, not just about race, but about gender, about a lot of things. But I think because of the police brutality and these other things, Trump and these things have been amped up to another level. So there's a rhetoric, and that rhetoric's at a pitch that they have to counter to. And, you know, and Trump, I mean, a large part of his appeal is race-based. I mean, you know, if anybody's playing the race card, it's him. And so it's there. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you know, part of the thing that got him to where he was his fervor about, you know, Islamic migration and, you know, the Mexican border and all that. And I think that's tapped into another anger because the demographics of the country are changing. And that's something that no one's really talking about in any real kind of way about what that really means about who America is never who it thinks it is, but, you know, but even at that level. And he's made these kind of quirky appeals to African American and to Latino voters that people know that he's not serious, but there's a base of, there's something that touches a sensitive bone in that body about like who does really care about these things. So, I mean, one of the things that no one's talking about is, you know, the levels of poverty in America. I mean, that's something that no one talks about. And however one thinks about is that tied to race or not. I mean, that's an issue that no one talks about at all.
Now, your book is a satire, and there's a powerful scene where the narrator's father is shot dead by the police, unarmed, which is something that, you know, you could read about in the newspapers in recent times. Sure. Is it okay to laugh about this kind of stuff, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think people laugh. You know, it's not an actual thing. It's not like somebody laughing at the thing. It's my take in retrospect about, you know, an imaginary act. And I think, you know, it's that weird thing of what's funny, you know, and I think maybe the act itself might not be funny, but the analysis can be funny. The inside out things can be funny. And yeah, I mean, I think it's always okay to laugh. And I say that guardedly. I think that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. But I think when you're moved to laugh, you need to laugh.
It's Paul Beatty there. More now on the US election, and rock star Bruce Springsteen has been speaking to our arts editor, Will Gompertz, about the state of the presidential race.
Part of what's going on is you have 30 or 40 years of deindustrialization and the globalization of the economy. So there were a lot of people that were left out of that, whose voices have been fundamentally ignored and not heard. These are folks who feel that Donald Trump has been listening to them, right? And speaks for them on some level. I think he's a con man and they're getting played, you know, but.
Just before we go, we wanted to update you on that breaking news we brought you earlier. The hostage situation in Brussels. 15 people were detained in a supermarket, but we are now seeing on news reports that The man involved has surrendered to police, so a apparent end to that hostage situation in Brussels. So that's all from the programme. Next time, it's the weather. But from now, from me and all the team, it's a very goodbye. We'll see you next time.